Welcome back, everybody, to linuxacademy.com. My name is Jerry, and in today's course, we continue with Jenkins Quick Start. So what we're going to talk about now is how to set up a Jenkins slave node. And a slave node is just something that the Jenkins master server, which is what we connect to and is the only server that has Jenkins actually installed on it, it can offload builds to a slave node either as needed or based upon something in the build credentials that we set up. Now that slave node is set up in our Jenkins configuration, and Jenkins, once it's been given the proper setup information, will deploy a Jenkins agent that allows it to control that agent, and it uses SSH and the credentials that we've already set up. So if you have not already defined a slave node in your environment, please do so. Make sure that you create the Jenkins user on that slave node and exchange the username credentials or the SSH keys so that we can use that from the master to log into the slave. So let's go ahead and do that now. From here on our master node, let's go over here to our slave node, and we've already created and exchanged the keys between the two items, I believe. So let's do an SSH, and we're already logged in as Jenkins here, so we should just be able to do tcox2 mylabserver.com, and we get logged right in. Good. So once that's been done, one of the other things that you'll want to do is if there are plugins that you intend to use that require the use of external utilities, be sure to install them. So for example, over on the slave node, we don't have Git installed, I don't believe. We do not. So let's make sure that we install it. We'll do a sudo yum install and git. That way, if our slave node is called upon to do a build that requires Git, because we've configured the GitHub plugin, that Git will be available for us to use. In this case, that's all we're going to install. If I had other things, if there are plugins for Docker and Kubernetes and a number of other things, but we're just going to install Git. Now, right now, we do not have Java installed at all. And Java is going to be required to be running on the slave node in order for the agent to deploy. Fortunately, Jenkins, as long as it has the credentials for SSH, is smart enough to do this for us and then to deploy its agent. So one other thing that we're going to create over here is we are in the home Jenkins directory. Let's make a directory that we can use for our workspace remotely. So we're going to make, in the home Jenkins directory, we're just going to make a directory called Jenkins slave, and you'll see we're going to use that here in just a moment. So from our dashboard, we're going to go to Manage Jenkins, and in Manage Jenkins, we're going to find the Manage Nodes. Now, we've looked at this before and saw that we have a single master, but what we need to do now is we're going to create a new node. So let's just call this, it's a permanent agent. It's the only available option to us. Let's just call this CentOS Slave 1. This is just a name that we can refer to this node by. Let's go ahead and click OK. And then we've got some stuff that we need to fill out. So this is our CentOS slave test node. The number of executors are the number of threads that are allowed to run jobs on the server. On the master, we have 2 of them. Let's put 4 on the slave. The remote root directory. This is the directory that we just created. So let's do a home Jenkins and Jenkins slave. What do we mean by a label? We go over here and click here, and it tells us labels or tags are used to group multiple agents into one logical group. We're not going to need to do that, so I don't have to apply a label if I don't want to, but if I want to, I can just simply call it CentOS underscore slave, for example. That way I can refer to it as either the name of the node or the label itself. Either one of those will work when I define where my builds should run, and we'll get to that here in just a moment. So the usage is, we want to say only build jobs with label expressions matching this node. So what we're going to do here is we're going to indicate when this node should be used rather than saying use this node as much as possible. So we'll only build jobs with label expressions matching this node. It determines how the master uses the slave. If we say use it as much as possible, the master will offload as much work to the slave as it can. In this case, we just want to control what goes on it, so we'll only build jobs with those labels that match the node. Launching method. So launch agents via execution of command on the master, or in this case, we want to launch slave agents on Unix machines via SSH. That's how we're going to configure this. So we're going to indicate the host that is going to be our slave. So tcox2.mylab server in this case. Let's add credentials for Jenkins. We're not going to use username with password. We'll use the SSH username with a private key. The username is indeed Jenkins. From the Jenkins master.ssh, we've already got it set up for us. We did that in our initial setup video. There's no passphrase. What do we mean by ID? An internal unique ID by which these credentials are identified. So what we can say here is Jenkins user key, and the description is the connection for our slave node and its credentials. And then we'll go ahead and add. Now we can set up environment variables and or tool locations separately if we want to. In this case, this is all we're going to do. We're going to save this. And now we have a CentOS slave. And you'll see this little X next to it. And well, why do we have that? Well, we just set it up and it's got to deploy the node. So this node is being launched. See the log for more details. So let's go ahead and see the log. And what we can see is couldn't figure out the Java version. So it's looking for Java on these locations. Since it can't find it, it's downloading a version of Java that's compatible, and then it's installing it. Once it's installed Java and set up the correct environment variables, then it will launch the slave node, which connects it to the master and allows the master to execute builds as called. So right now we see agent successfully connected and online. So if we go back here, then we go back to the list. Our CentOS slave no longer has the X next to it, and it gives us information about that particular slave. It tells us how much free disk space, what's the free swap space, what's the temp space, etc. Most importantly, it tells us that the clocks are in sync, so anything that I schedule on the master will launch at the same time on the slave, since the slave clock is in sync with the master clock. Now we see over here that on the build executor status, we have 2 threads that are available to execute builds on the master. And then we have 4 executors that are able to execute builds on the CentOS slave. Once we've got this set up, then we can set up jobs that will run specifically on that Jenkins slave, but we still call it from the master. So now that our build slave is set up, in our next video, we'll go ahead and create a couple of different builds so that we can see the difference in behavior in launching a build on a slave from our master versus launching the build from the master to some other node. But for configuring our first build slave, and there's no limit to the number of slaves that you can set up, it's based on your capacity needs and the capacity in your environment. That's all there is to it. My name is Terry for Linux Academy.